Tu m'entends? Est-ce que tu m'entends? Ben là, ouais. All right. So thanks for attending the Red Team panel. Now we have 2 more talks before the lightning talks. So it's my pleasure to welcome again Ron Bowes. He's been a great speaker, definitely one of my favorites. He's a lead security researcher at the Grey Noise Labs team. He's running the CTF for the B-Side San Francisco conference, and he's the founder of the LongCon conference in Winnipeg. And yeah, so please help us in welcoming Ron to the stage again this year.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for having me back. This is, I think, my 3rd time speaking at NorthSec and maybe 4th or 5th time attending. So I really appreciate it. I appreciate you all coming. I appreciate Hugo scheduling me when there's nothing else happening. So thanks for that. Yeah, as he said, last year when you saw me, I would have worked at Rapid7. This year I'm at Grey Noise. So basically, when I want to come up with a talk, I try to think of like a theme and what I'm going to talk about and do and stuff. And it always winds up coming back to like vulnerabilities. So I pretty much picked a couple of vulnerabilities that I think are interesting. F5 big IP and MoveIT transfer. 2 things that were kind of big news in 2022, 2023. And most of this talk is going to be taking a deeper look at them and dissecting kind of what they look like, how they work, stuff like that on a technical level. And then like what they look like in honeypot. I guess I should mention, like I work for a company, Grey Noise. This is obviously not a sales pitch or anything, but we do honeypots. We have like thousands and thousands of honeypots on the internet. And our big product, besides honeypots, is like selling the intelligence from the honeypots. I've also got a whole pile of stickers in my backpack that I forgot to put out, but I should give those away afterwards if anyone wants stickers. So who am I? As Hugo mentioned, my name's Ron. I'm a security researcher. I work at Grey Noise. I've got a husband who's enjoying the city right now. I've got 2 birds. The green one on the left is Clang, reading my headphones. The one on the right is Sharp, probably about to bite me. They're both green sheet conures, GCC, GCC and compiler jokes. I have lots of different hobbies, weird stuff, whatever. At work, my job title is vulnerability researcher, and what that means is I try to understand vulnerabilities, both when they come into our honeypots and I see them and go, what is this? What's it actually exploiting? What's it trying to do? Stuff like that. And how can we tag things that are known? So like new vulnerability comes out in like Palo Alto or in MoveIT or in whatever. How can we detect people trying to exploit this vulnerability? We do a lot of machine learning magic stuff to like detect unusual traffic. And often that will turn up like old vulnerabilities. Somebody trying to exploit like a 2022, 2021, 2009 vulnerability. So we see lots of weird stuff. You can access at viz.greynoise.io is our website. If you're interested in seeing like the VIP product or whatever for a month or something, get in touch with me. I can probably recommend it. So anyway, we'll talk about vulnerability research. The little text says, this text is too impossible to read. Which is a reminder that I linked these slides at the end. So if you want a copy of these slides, I will have a QR code at the end that you can scan, and you don't have to write things down if you don't want to. So start with a couple of quick definitions. This is going to be like very simple definitions, kind of from my perspective, what I care about. Like what is a vulnerability? And I think a lot of you being in InfoSec probably already know this, but I thought I'd put it up anyway. It gives me a chance to put like some examples down here. If you can't read them, it's not a big deal. The little examples I put on these slides don't matter too much. It's just sort of a example of what I see. So vulnerabilities like coding error or logical error, or something that makes an application like attackable, where you can run code against it or get information from it or whatever, stuff like that. It's discovered by somebody. Sometimes it's researchers, someone like me who's like digging around in code. Sometimes there's bug bounties, there's internal audits, stuff like that. Sometimes there's hostile groups, whether it's like ransomware, profit groups, foreign intelligence, local intelligence, whatever. You never know. Depending on who discovers it, you're going to get different amounts of information. And that's kind of what the core of this talk is like sometimes they publish details, sometimes they don't. But the risk to the end user or to the businesses and all stuff is sort of the same. So it's sort of our job to figure out like what is the actual risk of this and what are people doing with it. Then there's exploits. Exploits code is code that takes advantage of the vulnerability. So sometimes it's developed by like researchers, someone like me. Sometimes it's scanning companies. Sometimes it's exploitation companies like Metasploit, Core Impact, stuff like that. And sometimes again, it's the malicious groups who are not going to share. And depending on who's developing the exploits, you may or may not find out what they look like until someone attacks you with them. which is what we kind of do as honeypots, is we often will detect these exploits on the internet, and then we're able to let everyone know, like, hey, this is actually being exploited. Often, someone will post proof of concept code, and someone else will grab the exploit and weaponize it, and like use it to install a backdoor or whatever. I think I have a couple of slides about that coming up. What's really interesting is when you see the bad exploits or the broken exploits being fired off. I had a couple of slides about that I got rid of because this talk was already too long. But there's one funny story. This is on our blog. There's a link to the blog at the end. But I saw traffic that was hitting our honeypot that looked like a vulnerability I'd like researched about a year ago. But I saw like all the fields were said test. And what they did was they took like the first sample from my blog that didn't actually work yet and was firing that at the internet rather than taking the like Metasploit module that I wrote. So it's really weird that people just fire things at the internet and see what happens, I guess. It's kind of strange. I don't really want to get into the disclosure debate. I thought it was sort of interesting that it's come up again in like the 20 years I've been doing InfoSec, and as long as it's been around, there's always been like, do you disclose, do you not disclose? And Rapid7, which is my former team, got into a fight with JetBrains, and there was a big story about it a couple months ago. I thought I'd just mention it. I didn't want to take a side. It's just sort of funny stuff that happens. So when you're running a honeypot, you see sort of different types of vulnerabilities, or different types of exploits, I should say. Some of them are scanners, and scanners will often, they're often not malicious. They're a company like Security Scorecard or Qualys or Dark Web, Darknet, whatever, scanning the internet to see like this new vulnerability came out, CV, blah, blah, blah. Who's vulnerable to it, and what's the risk of this on the internet? So we'll often see things like a ping command, ping blah, blah, blah to os.live. We see tons and tons of that. That's a Zixel vulnerability being exploited there in the top left. The lower left that I'm standing in front of, this is a vulnerability in Apache Tika, and I don't know much about it besides, I pretty much just searched our honeypots to see like what's a few things I could throw on the slide. And this runs cmd/c who am I. So it just prints the current user, which again is, it's not installing anything malicious. It's just seeing like, is this vulnerable? The lower right is a super famous log4j. That was all the talk in 2021. And this is using log4j to just do a hostname lookup. I think these are all really cool because I like DNS. I don't think I've done a talk here about DNS, but I've done a lot of talks about how using DNS to find vulnerabilities. And it's really cool to trip myself. It's really cool to see people using like ping blah 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 os.live, which will, it's neat because ping is never, or DNS lookups are never really blocked from servers. It can happen, but it's super duper rare. But these will do like recursive DNS lookups, and will, if the server, if OS or whatever owns OS, if they see the CONU3A blah blah lookup happen, they know that command ran, and therefore this unique signal is sent. I think it's kind of cool. Another thing we see a ton of is malware droppers. I grabbed two random examples from our logs. The top one was it's fairly new. That's Palo Alto from like 2-3 months ago. That was kind of hit the news for a couple days. It was a vulnerability in the Palo Alto operating system. I didn't spend a lot of time digging into it. My coworker did, so I just grabbed an example. But what you see is a session ID equals // blah 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 / all that stuff. And the big base 64 there on the right translates to bash-i blah blah. So like this is some malicious attacker who's doing something. I didn't actually look what they're doing. The lower one is a vulnerability in Realtek Jungle, which is something I never heard of. But you'll see again, the exploit runs curl HTTP:// 10 dot whatever. It's a little bit weird there's a 10 address because this is an internet sensor. So I'm not exactly sure what this is trying to do, but they're doing it. Probably a misconfigured exploit. Who knows? Ultimately, every once in a while I'll like grab one of those payloads like on the last slide and think, what is this? Like, what are people trying to do right now? And pretty much every time I do it, it's either crypto mining or Mirai, the botnet. In the case of crypto mining, it's happened a couple times at the bottom here. Again, I'll have the slides at the end. I'll link to the slides. But I will grab the backdoor from somewhere, see what it's actually doing, and it pretty much always winds up running a command. This one grabs, hard to read this close. This one downloads something from raw to github-user-content.com, which is interesting that they're hosting like a malicious payload on GitHub. I think I reported that one. I think it got taken down. I was talking to a GitHub guy a couple days ago, and I gotta say, if you're still here, I appreciate like how well GitHub takes down these exploits. But ultimately, it decodes to like wget the payload, chmod the payload and run the payload. If you actually look at the payload, it's watchdog and watchbog are both executed, and I draw strings on it, and the strings show a bunch of crypto mining code. So I'm assuming that's what it is. It might not be, but that's my assumption. So that's pretty much a quick rundown of like general vulnerabilities. Now I'm gonna take a little bit of time and do a couple of like deeper dives into vulnerabilities that I find interesting. The first one's gonna be F5 big IP. So this one I think was interesting because it's one of the first ones I worked on. When I was at Rapid7, I started there in like early 2022, and this is one of the first things that was like a big advisory came out and said like CVSS 9.8 remote code execution in F5 big IP, which is important software. And I thought, okay, I'll take a look at this. And ultimately somebody else published the exploit code, and I just went from the exploit and worked backwards to how it worked. But it was a really interesting piece of software, and I spent a bunch of time like digging for more vulnerabilities, and you'll see why I think it's interesting. But I spent some digging for more vulnerabilities. I found a few things I reported. You can still find those. They weren't nearly as serious, but it kind of got me interested in software, so I've kind of kept this in my back pocket as like fun story to tell. So this is a screenshot from my company's site, Grey Noise. It just shows that this is still being like exploited. Like people are still firing exploits for this on the internet. Whether they're succeeding, I have no idea, but people are still trying. So let's look at the advisory. The advisory sounds scary. It says, undisclosed requests might bypass authentication. That's kind of bad, bypass authentication. If we scroll down the advisory, we see this. On the right, that's the remediation. So if you can't install a patch, they suggest editing your HTTP Apache config file and ensuring basically these lines. And what these lines are doing ensures the request header of connection is set to close or keep alive. That's all it does. It's like complicated XML stuff, but it just makes sure the connection header is legit, which is kind of weird. Like, what's that mean? And then low down here, the stuff that's behind me again, because I'm standing too far. The stuff that's behind me is their indicators of compromise. So they said when this was hitting the internet initially, like look for this request in your logs to see if you've been exploited. And this hint from the request says a connection from http://localhost 8100 / blah 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 / bash. Bash kind of gives you a hint of what this request does. So I have a couple of slides. Basically, I posted a screenshot on the first slide. There's like 550,000 lines of changes in this. So it was a huge patch. And I forget exactly how I figured out which file was the one that was interesting. But modauthpam.so was the one that the patch was actually fixing. Modauthpam is an Apache module for authentication to like verify user is valid before processing the request. And there's basically two major changes made to this module. The first one's here. It ensures that connection header is either close or keep alive. Familiar? That's the same thing that the workaround did. And then the second one is this. Basically, it takes the F5 auth token header and verifies that a file with the same name as it exists and has valid contents. So basically, /var /run /pamcache / the header value ensures that exists and has a valid like hash or something. I forget. So that's the two changes I made. Now trying to figure out like what can these changes actually mean takes a little bit of like working backwards. Before I actually give it away, two fun facts, and this is only fun if you're me. If you're actually running the software, it's not very fun. First one is authenticate users can run bash commands remotely. That's just a feature of F5 big IP devices. I don't know why I think it's a good idea, but they do. On the right is a screenshot from F5's support page showing you how to use this this endpoint /mgmt /tm /util/bash. How to use the endpoint to read your log files, which is a decision. But basically, it shows you how to access the endpoint. And then on the bottom here, I access the same endpoint using a password. Like this is a valid password on this particular device. But it uses that password to run the whoami or the ID command. And you'll see that the user runs it as his root, which kind of sounds bad until you realize there's not really user separation on these devices. So I don't know how well this is known outside of like researchers, but everyone who does research on these devices is aware of this one. I wrote about it on the Grey Noise blog. But basically, if you're already on the device, like I'm on the F5 big IP device at this point, you can run a command against localhost with no password, and it'll just run. This can be done as like any local user or any SSRF vulnerability or anything like that. What happens is, if you connect to localhost 8100, there's a separate server. And I should say, do I have that on a slide? Nah. Yeah, there's the front-end server, which is Apache. That's the one where the connection header is changed and whatever. Then there's a back-end server, Jetty, Jetty, and that runs on localhost 8100, and there's no authentication on that one. However, if there's an XF5 auth token, it will validate it first. If there's no XF5 auth token, it just lets you run requests as root, and it's fine. That's kind of the hint to how this whole vulnerability works is, if there's an F5 auth token, it checks it. If there's not, it doesn't. So how do we remove the auth token? Basically, this is the thing I didn't know about that I learned on this project, was that the HTTP connection header can be keep alive, it can be close, or it can be a list of headers to remove. That means that if you send XF5 auth token connection : XF5 auth token, it will remove the XF5 auth token header, and the backend will think it's allowed. And that's pretty much a TLDR of the vulnerability. So to summarize, the front end checks username and password. Apache checks usernames and passwords, but not before that patch, it didn't check tokens. The back end checks usernames and tokens, but not passwords. If you can confuse them, so the front end thinks the back end validated, and the back end thinks the front end validated, you can just run code. And that's pretty much that vulnerability in a nutshell. This is a hit from a honeypot from about 2 weeks ago or so. I don't have a date on this, but it was very recent. Basically, we see someone hitting the endpoint. It has a basic authentication, YWR, blah, blah, blah. That decodes to admin : no password. The connection header is set to XF5 auth token, and then it just runs the command cd/temp, wget, blah, 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 installs a Crypt miner or something. So I took this exploit and I threw into a local, I should have mentioned that it's possible to still get the vulnerable software. So I installed the vulnerable software, ran the exact exploit against it, and oddly, it failed. It said content type must be application JSON, but that was an easy fix. I just added that content type header, and suddenly I could run code. So that was a much, much easier thing to do than reversing the whole connection header and stuff. So I appreciate the attacker sending us free exploits like that. So that is the F5 big IP. Check my time, it looks like I'm doing good. The second one's MoveIT auth bypass. And this one I chose because this one was a big pain in the butt when it came out. I don't think there's backstory on one of the slides, but the backstory is May-ish, about a year ago at this point. I think it was the end of May last year. News came out that a bunch of thousands of websites running MoveIT software had been compromised before anyone knew there was a vulnerability. And that was kind of crazy that some threat group basically found this series of exploits, developed their own exploit for it, ran it against the internet, and I'm sure you've seen the news that they compromised thousands of companies, and even to this day, there's still fallout from this vulnerability. What we got, I'll get to that in a sec. But yeah, it was a pretty big deal at the time, and it was a very complicated series of vulnerabilities. And for this talk, I'm just going to talk about the first 2 vulnerabilities in the chain of 5. I'll summarize them afterwards, but I don't want to spend all day on this. I could easily do an hour-long talk about just this vulnerability. Unfortunately, I really, really wanted to talk about this application because I think it was a really interesting story, but you can't get it anymore. Once this vulnerability came out, Progress, the company that makes this, kind of went to war with researchers. They stopped allowing us to download free versions or run it for free. I had a license from when I actually did it, but the license expired in July 2023. I spent some time fussing with my data, my computer, and stuff like that, but I couldn't get it to work. Unfortunately, I couldn't install it. I'm sure with time we could have bypassed it, but I had pretty good notes and write-ups and stuff. The link at the bottom here is the write-up I did in pretty deep detail about the whole vulnerability. Progress has had a big track record of vulnerability since then, and I'm a little bit sore at them for getting mad at researchers and taking away access. So kind of make fun of having a bunch of different vulns since then. But pretty much the information I had was from somebody else's honeypot. Huntress, another research company, at the time I was at Rapid7, posted like, here's a series of requests that the attackers made while exploiting the vulnerability. They didn't know what they referred to. Nobody at the time knew what the vulnerability was. And because there wasn't like a honeypot capture that was public, we knew the HTTP log, which is like the endpoints, but we didn't know what they actually, like, it's a post request that does the exploit, and we didn't know what the post request was. What was sort of interesting is the patch for it. There was like 3 different patches, but the initial patch to kind of like stimmy the first vulnerability in the chain was very, very simple. It was very simple, very easy to understand, very easy to reverse engineer, but it was completely opaque as to what it actually did. And we had no idea, like from this list, which ones were actually the important things. The 2 requests I'm actually going to focus on are the 2 circled, or squared. So part 1 of the patch, if you're a developer and you're reading this, you might see why this is a bad idea. But they removed a function called set all session variables from headers. It does what it sounds like. It takes a header, x siloc session seshvar, and then parses it and sets a session variable based on that. You might wonder what session variables exist. My permissions one, my username's one, there's a whole bunch of things. If you could actually access this function to set session variables, you can very easily escalate your privileges from nothing to everything. And we will see why that's not enough shortly. The second thing they patched was this big monster SQL statement. If you ever have a SQL statement that looks like this, it's bad. I actually ran this through a .NET formatter, and it didn't look any better. So you just get this big blob. What's important is email equals to, and then a variable the user controls email address. So basically, this is it's obviously SQL injection. What was not obvious was how to actually access the SQL code. How do you set it? How do you set your email address in this code? It was not at all clear. So part one, session injection. This is what a potential exploit for it looks like. I ran curl. The transaction is session underscore set vars, and the session variable is my permission colon 60. 60 was, I think, admin, and then your session ID. And this command will basically upgrade your session from anonymous to admin, which is kind of cool. You'll notice the big problem here is localhost. This can only be run against localhost. It cannot be run remotely. I think the next slide, I show exactly what happens. Yeah, if you try to run it remotely, remote access prohibited. So how do we access this session? It seems very obvious that the vulnerability is, or the exploit for this is going to be messing with the session, but how exactly do you do that was the question. What I eventually noticed, and I should have noticed this faster, was when they accessed the machine to the ASPX page, it was accessed from ::1, which is IPv6 for localhost. So this was actually accessed via localhost, not via the internet, which is a clue. What I eventually realized is that these two requests from that first slide in the section are sort of inverted because the log happens after the request. So the attacker accesses this post request to the MoveIT ISAPI DLL. That request accesses localhost on machine to the ASPX, and then it gets logged in reverse order. So there's all these little things that kind of messed me up when I was working on this. But what's important is MoveIT ISAPI.dll action equals M2. That endpoint will forward stuff to machine to the ASPX, but it will only forward folder add by path, which was some meaningless thing. We wanted session set vars. So the reason I talk about this is because it's kind of a weird, complicated, this accesses this sort of thing. And we spent about 2 weeks on this. This was a significant amount of time doing this, from reversing. Eventually, I got tired of testing stuff with curl, so I started using Ruby. Everybody makes fun of me for using Ruby, but every once in a while they get lucky. The screenshot at the very top there was people, as Hugo said, I wrote the B-side San Francisco CTF, which we ran about 2 weeks ago. And I did all my solutions in Ruby, and the players didn't like that because Metasploit developers use Ruby and nobody else does. So I wrote this Ruby script, which basically accesses the endpoint with folder add by path, but I got a different error, and I know it's not going to mean much to you, but the error message at the bottom was different when it accessed it via Ruby compared to when it accessed it via curl. And that made no sense. It's the exact same request, the exact same headers, same everything. What's different? What's different is Ruby changes the case on headers. I don't know why. Running honeypots, this is a big pain because I don't want it to change case, but it capitalizes the first letter of each thing. It turns out that the core vulnerability of this whole thing is that the front-end server is case sensitive and the back-end is case insensitive, or possibly vice versa. I get mixed up. But basically, the front-end that validated that you're not running the session set variables command, the thing that validated that session set variables command versus the add folder by path, one was using the full case sensitivity and one wasn't. So it turns out the secret was to slip through by using changing the case on the first letter, which was kind of crazy. So this is the full exploit that we ended up developing, or not the full. This is the first part of like 5 parts exploit that we started developing, where we set the, this is long and hard to read, but we set the session set vars command first, and then we set the other one. Oh yeah, there we go. The X SLog transaction uppercase, folder add by path, and then the normal case session set vars. And by using 2 different headers, 2 different parts parsed differently, and we ended up with the RCE. From there, we were able to figure out a place where we could stick the single quote to get the classic SQL error. And like, once we finished that, we were able to like, that. So pretty much, this was the first part of the vulnerability, was to cause a SQL error. Once the SQL error happened, I don't have these on slides because I didn't want to spend, I've only got 3 minutes left. I didn't want to spend too much time on it, but basically, you take SQL injection, you create a token for the API, then you use that to start a file upload. The file upload creates a serialized object, then you leak the encryption key, then you deserialization. The steps to exploit this are ridiculous. You can look at the Metasploit module or the attacker KB write-up, but it's a very complicated vulnerability. Here's what looks like a honeypot. Once again, I just searched our honeypots for action equals M2, and this is the first thing that popped out. You'll see like instantly what the vulnerability is. It has 2 different cased SI lock, or the different SI lock cases. It's got the SQL injection. It has some of the session ID stuff. So yeah, that's what looks like a honeypot. What was really annoying, and like I was at Representative at the time, I know that Grey Noise had this exploit because they ran honeypots, and I was super jealous that like people were detecting this via honeypots and I didn't have access to them. So a couple more slides, closing thoughts, stuff like that. So pros and cons. So I think there's a place in the world for doing manual reverse engineering, obviously. That's what I do much of the time. There's also a place in the world for using honeypots. Some of the advantages of honeypots, I just try to brainstorm a few things. This cord is evil. Exploit dev with honeypots is super duper fast. Like often you can just see the exploit and then like work backwards. It's basically free. We run like thousands of sensors on the internet and people just send us free exploits, which is, I think, the subtitle of this talk, which I think is cool. You know what's actually in the wild. Often a vulnerability comes out that sounds like it's gonna be a big deal and then nobody exploits it. And like, it's not saying it's a waste of time looking into it, but it's not as necessary. You can also see the variance. The advisories often will disclose like 10 different vulnerabilities at once. I did a talk at B-Sides PDX last year about some other software that I've forgotten. Doesn't matter. And it was a CV that had, I think, 18 different vulnerabilities. And figure out which vulnerabilities matched which CVEs was actually kind of tricky. I had to basically guess. So understanding what the actual vulnerability is people are attacking is kind of cool. The disadvantages is like understanding the F5 code, like this weird 2 different server thing is sort of important for next time you want to find a vulnerability. Like I took the F5 and found more vulnerabilities based on that. Clever attackers avoid honeypots. We've gotten pretty good at like realistic honeypots, and like our customers can deploy honeypots, but attackers can still avoid them. Like no matter how good a honeypot is, it's never going to pass like deep inspection. Maybe that's controversial to say, but it's kind of true. Honeypots are also kind of reactive. Like we use a lot of machine learning magic stuff to detect like attempted exploits that we don't have signatures for, but ultimately the exploit's already being used when we detect it. It's also difficult to tell if a vulnerability works. I had more slides about this I had to remove just for time, but like the number of bad exploits we've seen that don't actually work is kind of high. So we can only tell so much when people are trying to exploit something. And that's pretty much the end. I'm going to put a pile of stickers on the stage if anyone wants to grab some. Also magnets, fridge magnets. If you want to get in touch, my email address, my alias everywhere is YagoX86. All the social medias, GitHub, etc. I have a personal blog. We have our corporate blog. The slides are in the QR code in the corner or on this link. And yeah, I don't think there's a proper Q&A session, so I think if there's questions, we can do them now. Happy to keep chatting until Hugo drags me off stage. But I will put out the stickers as well. So thank you.
All right. Are you ready for the last talk of 2024? So it's my pleasure to welcome Corinne to the stage. First-time speaker, a long-time participant. She has a master's in software engineering from ETS, bachelor's from UQAM, great schools, great local talent. So please help me in welcoming Corinne to the stage.
Well, this is overwhelming, so let's go. They told me you'll be closing the talks, so no pressure. No pressure at all. So welcome and thank you for being here to Redefining Digital Security. So what we're proposing here is the need for a new approach to IPV victims. Well, for IPV victims. So first of all, who am I? So I'm Corinne, he just said that. I am the co-founder and spokesperson for Lab 2038, or 2038, that we co-founded in 2016. I mask during the day as a cloud security specialist, so cool. That's it. And you can find me around at PK Lig right here. So, who are we? What is Lab 2038? Most of you have not heard of us, but hopefully you will eventually soon. We're a nonprofit organization based in Montreal. Our differences, we are a multidisciplinary team. So we come from everywhere from academia, sociology, cybersecurity, engineering. We set out to propose or help develop cybersecurity for marginalized groups. So making it a bit more affordable and accessible for everybody, not just experts. And we've been working accidentally on IPV for almost 10 years now. What is this? So what do? We do basically mostly media interventions. We have a lot of trainings and consulting. We started out with social workers and caseworkers for IPV. Eventually, we went on to talk with IPV survivors, and most recently, we started getting involved with law enforcement and giving them trainings about how maybe this should be an issue they should address a little bit more. And also, we hope that we will be able to collaborate with legal teams very, very soon. So, what's IPV? Most of you will know, but for the others, it's just an acronym for Intimate Partner Violence. It's a new term to design domestic violence or domestic abuse. It's all the same thing, generally. And we found out as cybersecurity experts that our usual threat models do not apply in the context of IPV. It's still a very gendered issue, and we have some numbers to back that up. We, like I said, we've been working with shelter workers for a while now, and this research actually came out of their backstage talks, the moments when we were not during the trainings, that were telling us how desperate they were to get some second opinions, some help, any kind of help for technology facilitated violence. So we started working with them, and we thought that we should address this issue because IPV is really, really, really spreaded a lot. And also, it's, like I said, the threat model do not apply. Well, the threat model that we usually use do not apply here. Eva Galperin, founder, not co-founder, but project manager, president of something at EFF, we love you. She basically mentioned that attacks, types, and patterns of IPV perpetrators resemble more advanced persistent threats, so APT, than usual cyber criminality. And this is really wild to us because that's not taken care of by nobody, really. Anybody that interacts with the real world will not try and protect you from IPTs. They will just try to protect you from any kind of simple phishing attacks. So we need to do something about that because, you know, some stats, 1 out of 3 women over 15 has experienced a form of intimate violence, whether that will be financial, sexual, physical, psychological abuse, like just take that into account. In those cases, for 98% of those cases, perpetrators will be using technology to intimidate or threaten their victim, and that is a stat from 2012. So you can absolutely believe that it has been worse since. Also, since we've been working with shelter workers, the risk for homicidal events will jump up to 80% at the moment or shortly after the separation. So it is a very delicate step for the victims at that time. And it makes any leaks, any data leaks, extremely dangerous for the victims and also for the shelter workers and also for the other IPV victims that are at that shelter. So yeah, we got some pretty scary horror stories from those, basically from all of those human leaks, as Eva Galkbrin calls them. And just to put that in perspective again, in 2022, 537 women died in Canada from IPV. So it is a very real issue. We estimate that in Canada, a woman dies every 48 hours, and that is very, very concerning. And we don't have much to protect them proactively. And this is our problem. All the work that we do here at Lab 2038 was very reactive. We're here to help the people that help IPV victims after the violence has occurred. And that is not good enough. That's just simply not good enough. We need to do better. And sadly, we realize that this is not up to us. We can be here to respond. We can be here to guide people that want to do better. But what we need actually is more awareness and more governance, especially from service providers. From those horror stories that I was talking about, many of them were about very simple data leaks that came from service providers that were just unwantedly giving the address, the new address of the shelter, or the new address of the victim to the perpetrator. And that happens a lot. We have a lot of stories of ordering a pizza, and the pizza delivery company does not understand that this is an IPV case, and the next time somebody calls and says, oh, I have a new address, but like, can you just tell me again? I forgot my postal code, and then you have the new address. So that's a thing. So it's, imagine human engineering, social engineering, but from the person you know best in the world. That's pretty scary. So we wondered what's being done right now to help prevent information leaks from service providers. And like I said, Eva Galperin calls them human leaks, which I like a lot. We want providers to be better geared towards protecting us from abusing X, because right now they're better geared towards protecting you from state actors than from your abusive ex, which again is terrible. So this brought us to the report that we published in 2023, which was very gratefully sponsored by the OPCC, which is the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, and they generously helped us to cooperate with CEDAF, which is now called CoSavoir, and l'Alliance des Maisons de Deuxième Étape, which is a shelter alliance mostly. And we set out to provide recommendations to digital services providers and enhance the service and privacy of IPV victims. So the goal was basically to identify process vulnerabilities from service providers that could lead to data leaks, evaluate the feeling of safety for IPV victims who use those services, and also to help protect these women from consequences of hasty data collection. So first of all, we set out to do a literature review to see what we know, what's written out there, what's written about the subject. And we had those criterias in English and French. We checked out for everywhere in the world, and those are the keywords that we're using, both in French and English, mostly for IPV and surveillance in both languages, which brought us to have about 100 papers to read. And we found out that technology, of course, allows for new tools to control and surveil, which creates new forms of violences and also intensifies others. So, great. We had a lot of legal case studies, mostly in the United States. We also have, well, most references offer solutions for IPV victims to defend themselves, but after the technology facilitated abuse has started, so, you know. And no references at all review businesses' policies for data collecting organizations. So in conclusion, you know, victim blaming. So you should have enabled 2FA, girl. That's on you. And that's, yeah, that sucks. So yeah, we really need to talk about this, absolutely. So second step, we went to do surveys and focus group and to understand what's needed. What do shelter workers and IPV victims need from us, cybersecurity specialists? So first of all, we did a first step that was surveys. So we did a survey that was available in 2022. We sent it to the 17 shelter from Alliance MH2. We had an 88% participation rate, which was great. And we mostly had questions about technological stack, what they used, how they chose the providers, the level of trust they had in those providers, and eventually the general feeling of safety working with those providers. Second step, we also have focus group, which happened at the summit of Alliance MH2, which reunited about 60 frontline workers from all over Quebec, and we divided them in 4 groups. We guided the discussion. Shout out to Anne-Sophie and Fanny, who are right here in the office, who helped us do that, which was great, talking to volunteers. And we wanted to offer them the opportunity to further the discussion started in the surveys and dig a lot deeper into the shelter's experienced human leaks, and also to give them an opportunity to talk to us about their experiences firsthand, to tell us those horror stories I was telling you about. And the answers were pretty, yeah, pretty concerning. So they view cybersecurity as important as physical security. And we're talking about people who have no experience whatsoever with cybersecurity at all. They just know it exists. They just know they need it. Second of all, we had, they need provider security measures, which are not hard to find, which are available anywhere on the internet. They would love to not have this general feeling of anxiety and dread when it comes to choosing a provider. Most of them just feel like they don't have a choice when it comes to choosing providers. Some shelters have even banned shelters. Some providers have even been banned from shelters just because we could not find any information on how they would handle IPV cases. So yeah, and some only because the terms of services were just too complicated to understand. So there's something at stake here. Providers should be, you know, a bit aware of that. So conclusion from that first part is that IPV victims and shelter workers really do need an adequate training on privacy and cybersecurity, and they're asking for it really hard. They would love policy changes from some provider. For example, avoid passing on files, victim files from employee to employee without any concern for privacy, adequately flagging APV cases, which sometimes is not even possible. Delete the perpetrator's contacts from IPV cases, because oftentimes the perpetrator's contact is the second on the list, and it will be contacted if the first person does not answer fast enough. And obviously allow special account managements for shared devices. We have some very, very troubling systems in place due to shared service. I don't know if you know, but a woman cannot take back her own phone number without the approval of the perpetrator. Doesn't matter if she pays for it, doesn't matter if she's been using it for years. It's just not her call to make. So yeah, that's one. Then we went on and did some case studies to see what's actually being done right now from the providers to help and do something about this situation. So we had 3 categories of providers. We had like processing services, so food delivery, transport services, etc. Those might seem really, really basic, but you know, to make a food delivery, you need a physical address, and that is a very, very dangerous thing to know if you just fled an IPV situation. We have a lot of platform and softwares, and also there was tech support, so anything from IT to customer service or any division of a service company that provided support in any kind of way. And then we divided the platform and software category in two, with apps and digital services. So apps, of course, social networks, entertainment, and and digital service with shared content and collaborative tools and IoT. The digital services and the tech support really resembles each other in the motivation for data collection, which is mostly which is a more efficient way of separating everything. So product and services usually will only ask for basic contact info, so phone numbers, delivery addresses, and so on. Application services will actually build their entire business model for data collection to be able to sell it eventually, but that's not how they sell it. And digital services and tech support have the same thing where they want the data necessary to provide a service. So data collection is not the first demand for those, but they still have a lot of information that they can share, and they have to manage. So we made an analysis for that with three main focuses. We checked out if there were any form of recognizing cases of IPV and harassment for anybody in the company. We checked if there was an incident response measures, and if there were, how good they were. Eventually, we went to see what was the organizational awareness of the threat, meaning how aware were each employee that they were the first line of defense for those women that were their customers. No, that's what's not supposed to be there. So we did some case studies, and we had 5 providers that we went out and checked for it, but we cannot tell you about none of them. We can just give you like general insights. Yeah, sorry. Just give us beer afterwards, we'll talk. Just not on stream. So, result, things are not good, unsurprisingly. So, first of all, nobody shares their internal policies online. Nobody does it. No policy was specific to IPV at all. Customer service employees are prohibited by law from asking questions that are too personal. For example, are you moving because of an IPV situation? They cannot ask that legally. Oh yeah, and we are only like talking, the policies that we'll show you later on are just like the general legal policies that we could find, because there's no IPV policies at all. And yeah. But there's a silver lining. Things are not good except for one provider that we love very much. That's not perfect, but doing a lot more than all of the others. Yeah, they have, that provider in particular has an incident response protocol for IPV. They recognize any localization or contact information as sensitive data, and they protect them as such. Employees with reasonable doubts can and should flag suspected IPV cases. For example, if some customer asks, could my ex have access to my data? That's a red flag, and they should flag it as, yeah, there's a risk here. So that's reasonable doubt. It's not a lot. Also, those cases are then handed over to a specialized team, specialized in IPV team. So from there on, they just take out your case from the general stack of other cases. Like this one will be handled by a team that is specialized for IPV from there on. So nobody outside of that team will ever have access to your file again. And they implemented a pilot project for a dedicated line with IPV shelters. So the MH2 shelters that we're talking about created this pilot project, which means that they have a dedicated line with that provider. That means that they can go and ask, and they will only talk to the specialized team that I was talking about. So from there on, they never have to re-justify the fact that they're in an IPV situation. They don't have to put in the context anything. They're just right there, right away. So, conclusion part 1. Things don't look so good. So not a lot of providers want to talk about IPV. Some even mentioned being afraid of looking like they're doing it for political gain. I don't know how we'll call that in the future, like pink washing or whatever. But yeah, they think it's really, yeah, they'd rather just not be a part of that conversation. Some, and of course, there's no law, there's no incentive for those providers to actually care about IPV. Too few providers have specialized policies for IPV cases. Oh, yeah, that was it. No. Okay, so part 2, punchline, we know we can do better. So it's very clear that sharing details of specialized security policies with the general public would be very, very helpful for victim that could eventually change providers. You know, if you don't want to go back to the same provider that just treated you so bad, you'd like to know more. So that would be a really good selling point for some people. So forget the political gain, just think about helping people, maybe, I don't know. Also creating dedicated resources and helplines for IPV victims. Once again, the victim doesn't have to self-declare that she's a victim, doesn't have to explain the situation, just call the special landline and they know why you're here. Like you don't, it's like calling SOS violence conjugale. They know why you're here, you know why you're talking, we're good. Also, ensuring clear and efficient communication when speaking with IPV victims. So no, of course, forget about just the general gaslighting that goes on in every service providers or police officer. Just, you know, you're here. I consider you as a human person with reasonable doubts about your own situation. Maybe you know what you're talking about. Let's start from there. And also training employees to recognize and guide IPV victims to the right department or team would be very helpful again. And we went a little bit further for those apps that I was talking about. We did more use cases just to see, like, in the UI, in the general practices of just using day-to-day use of those apps, is there anything that's helpful for IPV victims again? So research criteria is really pretty obvious. The highlights are here. So security settings, accessibility, there's only Facebook where you can access those security settings in 2 clicks or less. 2FA, everybody has 2FA, which is great, but I think not so long ago, Facebook and Netflix were the only one that could use another kind of 2FA, like the other ones only had one kind, which was usually your phone number. Since then, Apple has changed that. They decided now you can use YubiKeys also, but you have to have 2 of them. So yeah, there's like too little and too much, but yeah, going there, I guess. There's activity review accessibility, so how fast can you go and check what devices are connected to your account. Connected devices name, everybody has that, but lower -1 point for Netflix because they still have the IP address that's accessible when you go and see the connected device, which gives you a lot of information about somebody's location. And also TikTok and Facebook and Apple have a lot of granularity in their settings, so they have a lot of where you can tweak your security settings exactly. That is good and bad. It's good for people like us who know what they're doing, but let's say my mom has a situation where she has to really get into the details. She will only be overwhelmed with this, and most people will be because it's a lot. So what are the risks, you ask now? All of that is really nice, but like what happens physically in the real world? Well, you know, social networks are really good with that, so you can get, let's say a victim has not already left the situation of IPV, like she's still living with the perpetrator. Any risk of targeted ads from the victim research and or browsing history could lead to finding out groups or Facebook groups or, you know, associations, shelters where you would have looked for information could come up with for your next person to see. Friend suggestion also for IPV organizations and help groups. There's also friend suggestion of the victim's new profile, since let's say Facebook has a lot of algorithm to check and see who do you know? You might know this person. Well, there's a lot of chances that if you kept your friends, which are still the friends of the perpetrator, well, that perpetrator will have your new profile suggested to them as a new friend, which is, again, not really what we want to see happen. Places and or events suggestions that reveal the victim's whereabouts, again. And also there's risk for entertainment platforms, so mostly harassment and discredit to victims. Discredit because usually it happens with modification of favorites or save contents. You can also see algorithm reprogramming, where I like to look at cats videos, but then suddenly all I see are, I don't know, beheading or catastrophes or road accidents. So that's something. So it's not detrimental to my physical well-being, but when I will go out and go see a police officer and say, my algorithm is all fucked, I wish somebody would do something about it, they will say, well, nobody cares, you know? That's not important. But it messes with some victim's head. We had actually one case of one woman who called us and said, I know what I'm gonna say is crazy. I know at that point where I checked in myself at Douglas Hospital because I really think I'm crazy. And they told me there was nothing wrong with me. So, and that one was a really insidious one. Like small changes happens, random messages were popping all the time from referencing her daily life that she was doing and not necessarily online. So yeah, you cannot explain that feeling of being watched, but it happens, and this is a really good way of harassing. Yep. Also, and data erasure, of course. If I made a playlist and it's not there anymore, it's not life-threatening, but it is annoying for sure, and just adds to the pile of harassment that I'm already facing. So, the miracle now is that there's a new trend of configuration assistance. So we have Facebook that did like a kind of a usable, accessible UI guiding users through all the security settings. It's a good start, and also you have the function see as, which helps you to see like what a friend or an acquaintance or somebody that's completely out of your circle would see, which is a very helpful feature. But Apple really is a good student right now because they made an IPv-specific approach to those configuration assistants. They have, let's say, they don't say that out loud, but they have a lot of features that look, well, scream IPv intervention. So they have a warning before enabling any changes that will be visible from the exterior. Let's say I want to take out the credentials for somebody that is in my Apple family and sharing my location. If I stop that interaction, the perpetrator will know that I stopped the tracking. And you need to know that like those perpetrators are highly motivated agents. They want to take control. They want to keep that control, absolutely. And every time we cut a line of control, they will find a new one, most of the time. And oftentimes that will lead to the risk of them popping physically into the life of the person they're threatening. They also, so Apple Configuration Assistance also has an emergency exit button that just erases everything that you were doing and gives you something really trivial to look at. And also they have a security control feature for emergency reconfiguration. So let's say I'm going through a really serious IPv crisis. Right now, let's say I just left the house I was sharing with the perpetrator. I can go into the security control feature and it will literally take me by the hand and tell me, this is what this feature does, this is what this security setting is for, do you want to change that? And they will do that. Like, it's a whole program, it's really well done. It's just a little bit hard to find, but it's a really good start. So, final conclusion, finally. You know, IPv victims should not have to become cybersecurity specialists, especially not in a crisis situation where they're already worried for their well-being. This is not a good time for learning anything, and you should not have to be an expert to survive. You don't need to be an IPv expert to be able to help also, since we're here at NorthSec and there's a lot of credentials in this room. Really, just ask. Any IPv victim or shelter workers is dying to have help. They're dying to have your expertise. Just hit up the local one and they will be so very grateful for your help. So yeah, if there's anything to left to you, that it's up to us to do better. So thank you. Are we doing questions or? Okay. So yeah, if anybody has comments, questions, they want to ask for stories, and Sophie is right there and she's ready to jump in. that's a good one. So the question was, what can we do to help Lab 2038? We're really looking for help. So if you have spare time and you want to train police officers, shelter workers, you want to have direct interaction with IPV survivors, we have a program right now that's called Tech Care. And what we do is we go and meet IPV victims to just and try and see if their iPhone, iPad, cell phone router has been compromised. And if anybody here is like a mobile expert, we really want to have you on our team just to be able to adequately and really efficiently scan devices to know if there are spywares anywhere on them. And there are so many, we get so many calls, especially now that our name is going out there. So yeah, if you want to help just scanning devices, you have a really cool project on GitHub, you want to help us, just hit us up. We'd love that, absolutely. Any other questions? I think that's it. Well, thank you very much again.
j'ai un HDMI direct.
Génial.
L'autre bord.
Do we have sound in these slides or just images?
Ça se peut.
D'abord, faut brancher ça.
Oui, non, on va s'en. Je sais pas si. Je vais.
Sais-tu si dans son vidéo il y a du son ou pas?
Il me semble que je vous ai entendu dire qu'il y avait une présentation qui avait du son. Il y a une présentation vidéo, mais je sais pas. Vidéo. Des fois, c'est juste montrer genre ce qui se passe. Là, fait que ça se peut que. Il n'y a pas de son? Parfait. C'est cool. Là, il détecte. Ah, ouais. Ça, c'est ce qui va être mis là? Oui, en ce moment. Je vais le mettre en mirror. Même, je dirais, tu peux-tu comme caster les trucs là-dessus? Je sais pas si les gars ont vu comme ça. Ouais, je vais le mettre. Parce que là, en ce moment, si tu casses ton laptop, c'est que le laptop ici. Là, t'as-tu un. Pas pour charger, mon cher, parce que. Oui. Tu vas arriver la même chose qu'avec le Redefining. Genre, c'est 15 minutes, je devrais être correct, mais je peux le charger. Non, ça, il y a tous les slides là-dessus, on change pas de laptop. Non, je sais. Non, mais d'après moi, il va être correct, mais je vais aller le brancher.
C'est un Mac, ça a tout son job.
Moi, je parle où dans ça?
Tu peux le ramener ça là-bas si tu veux. Ouais, on va. Parfait.
Partagez le micro, les gars. Battez-vous pas. Tout le monde va aller dans le
C'est bon, c'est juste avec le micro.
Hey, non, hein?
He's doing the mic.
Il est-tu on?
Test 1, 2.
Moi, je parle avec ça. Allô? Allô? Moi, je parle avec lui, dans le fond. Bonjour. Est-ce que tu veux que je fasse une intro ou c'est juste...
Bienvenue au show de stand-up. Non, on attend le cadrage, puis on va starter. Good. All right. So welcome to the Lightning Talks. This is a thing that we haven't done in the last few years, but we're starting it again. We're trying to give a voice to the community and people who can get through the CFP or didn't get a chance to submit. So the first one, we have Emile from Kaido, who's going to present about the workflows, new features in Kaido.
All right, thanks a lot. So I'm Emile, co-founder of Kaido. What we are is essentially an HTTP proxy. If you've used Burp Suite in the past, you know how to use Kaido. It's pretty easy. The difference is we're a client-server architecture, so essentially you have a GraphQL API on top of a Rust server, and you either use your browser or a desktop app to access it. And you can go crazy with the GraphQL. It's like completely open. A lot of people build cool stuff on top of it. But I want to talk to you about workflows. So what are workflows? We wanted to design something that everybody can create as plugins. Not everybody's comfortable with like creating huge Java plugins. We wanted people to be able to modify existing plugins easier and use minimal amount of code, and especially no setup required. So what we came up with is a system. I'm gonna go to the video, so it's gonna be a bit faster. All right, no full screen. So we have a workflow system. Here we're going to create a passive workflow. So the idea is on every request that comes through your proxy, you will want to do a bunch of stuff. So the first thing we're going to check is like, does it match a particular set of connections? If so, we're going to set it a different color. So as you can see, we connect the box together, and we're going to put a condition on the match HTTPQL. That's our special language that is similar to Wireshark, but for HTTP, and that allows you to filter stuff. And then from there, we have a response. So we're going to say, OK, if it matches, take the true branch. And then we're going to set a color on the particular request on your HTTP history. So once you've done that, you go back to your HTTP history and you reload your page, for example. And that gives you all the colors for those particular requests. So the idea behind the workflow system is we have an execution. All right, so we have an execution flow. So those are the lines you see on the graph, and they require a green node, which we call control nodes, to diverge, and that allows you to like just essentially do a linear flow. So by default, it's all linear, and it goes one node after the other, and you can do some pretty complex stuff. And we also have another flow, which is called a data flow, and that allows each node to have inputs and outputs, which you can enter in any node down the flow. So the idea is here I'm representing the data flow with the red arrows, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a direct relationship. You can reference the output of a previous node anywhere in your graph. You can have very simple things like tree, but you can have, again, very complex systems. And it's all like a JSON representation that represents the graph on that this workflow is, and you can modify it, you can share it. We are starting to build an open source like repository of all the workflows that the community is building. And it's very useful because, again, once you download it, you import it, you can easily modify it to your own needs, and you don't necessarily need to do any setup for it. And for example, we also have a JavaScript SDK. So if you want to do something a bit more complex, and you can embed small script into it. And it's based on Quick.js, which is a very neat JavaScript engine. If you've never used it, it's based in C. Super useful to integrate into other tools. And essentially, we have an SDK. So for example, you want to, in this example, you want to retry every request with the different methods. You can do that easily. It's if you've used JavaScript before, it's very simple. And we have this SDK that is highlighted here, where we resend the request. And then link finder is another one from the community. I wanted to show like what it looks like in the node system. So you have like, oh, on every response you check, is it in scope? Yes, we continue and we go to the JavaScript node, and that JavaScript node is again looking at the response body, matching for every regex to extract their links, and then you also have findings which you can create with the SDK. So that's kind of like an overview that I can give you in 5 minutes for how to work with workflows, and come talk to me, try it out. It's free for we have a community editions, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Oh, I'll say it's pretty good. Did you heard any feedback from the burp suit developer or user? It's like, if I were a burp suit developer, I'll be scared.
Yeah, we haven't heard from Burp Suite like Portswigger directly. We have a lot of people that are angry at Portswigger that are changing to us. So obviously, like, but we also have like core Burp Suite users that are like, I don't know, angry somehow that their favorite tool is not the only tool anymore on the market. But yeah, that's the way it is.
Good job.
Thanks.
So I saw the workflows were on GitHub. Is the whole thing open source or not?
No, it's not all open source. So we try to open source components of the thing, but we're a bootstrap company, so it's really hard to sell like open source software, unfortunately. So we're open sourcing where it makes sense, but not everything, and yeah, not our workflow system.
So you mentioned that you have a community repository. Based on your observation, which playbooks or runbooks are the most popular? The question really is like, how are your users actually using your product? What are they doing?
It's very new, so we don't really have a trend. I would say like the workflow system, it's been less than 2 months that we launched it, and we always add new features to it. So we haven't seen trends yet. I think what we've seen is like the SDK is very popular, so people seem to like to make some small scripts in JavaScript more than the nodes, but also we don't offer that many nodes yet built in, so we'll see how it goes in the future. All right, thanks a lot.
All right, thanks, Emile. So now I'll welcome Simon Lacasse to the stage to present about Stalker.
All right, hi, I'm Simon, and welcome to free and open source software, Stalker, free and open source extensible attack surface management. So to understand what's the purpose of the tool, you need to understand what is attack surface management or external attack surface management, ASM and EASM for short. So according to the internet, it's the continuous discovery, analysis, prioritization, remediation, and monitoring of cybersecurity vulnerabilities and potential attack vectors that make up an organization attack surface. So when we looked at the concept like 3 years ago, we thought, well, we realized that it often comes with a black box, a software that you gotta buy, and that is that you can't control anything. You don't see what's happening. You know nothing about false negatives. You don't have really any information on that. So we thought we could do better. So that's why we came up with the concept of extensible attack surface management, or XASM. And the thing is, it resolves around the concept of flexibility and transparency. So you take the framework approach to the problem of attack surface management, and you offer, okay, all right. You take the framework approach to the problem, and you offer a customizable and extensible automation and data visualization platform where you can really do anything and see everything. So here you can see the two concepts side by side. So you have attack surface management and XASM sharing all this thing about perimeter discovery, perimeter monitoring, and really giving you the attacker's view of your perimeter. But then you have this step back that XASM offers, allowing you for a full customizable workflow. So everything that we implement, everything about the workflow, you can modify it, you can remove it if it's not what you want. And it's really extensible also, so you can take the current workflow and add test cases to it, and add automation, add to the workflow infinitely. So all this extensibility, what it brings you, it really empowers you through the whole vulnerability lifecycle. So it only helps you. It not only helps you with the recon part of the process, but you can even use it for exploitation part and even regression testing. So here is Stalker in its second alpha version. It's available on GitHub under the GNU General Public License version 3. It's the first extensible attack surface management, or XASM, since we came up with the concept. And it, of course, implements this big focus on extensibility and complete workflow customization. So what we mean by transparency is that you can see everything that it's doing, and the core is fully open source. And through flexibility, what we mean is that you can really implement your whole workflow however you want it. And of course, it needs to be scalable to adapt to different environment sizes. So the data visualization and organization is really consumable through the web interface. There's also an API if that's what you prefer. And everything is stored in project, and this is where you organize your resources. So you can really keep track of your assets, and when you're done, it's an easy cleanup. You simply delete this project, and everything related to it is gone. Your attack surface, of course, you can show it without showing what it consists of. So there's the concept of domains, which are your domain names. Then there are the hosts, which are basically the exposed IPs. And then the ports that are on them, and the website that is basically a combination of the three, plus a little more info. What we mean by automation in Stalker, how do we implement the whole extensibility part? So you build these test cases through custom jobs. So this is basically Python workflow, Python test cases or nuclei test cases. And these automation part, they're going to emit findings, and these findings, they're going to be used as input for the next custom jobs through subscriptions. So the concept of subscriptions basically takes the output of a custom job and feeds it as an input for the next custom job, allowing you for infinite customization and extensibility. So here we have this candid pic, because I thought we couldn't have videos. We have this candid pic of Stalker performing a TCP scan on an IP. So we have big plans for Stalker. So for the beta and even more, we want to allow you for enhanced website visualization and capabilities. And we want to allow you to have even more flexibility by providing you with the capacity to build your own custom containers for your custom jobs. We want you to even have a finer control on what's happening through project and global parameters. We want you to have better visualization of your graph through views, IntelliSense and code editors, in even more test cases. But even more than that, we want your feedback. We'd like for you to try it out, give it a star on GitHub, and yeah, come talk to us about it. We're the guys with the red kites on the shirt. Thank you very much.
One quick question. Do you think any adversary will use your tool to scan their target?
They could, but it's not a tool that is meant to be subtle. So, and it's not a tool that automatically provides like attack capabilities. It's only a recon. So they might use it to see your perimeter, but I think it's better to have the capacity to yourself be able to scan your perimeter, because the attacker can do anything, right? They're gonna do their own thing, so might as well yourself have this power too.
Yeah, great, good job.
So do you have like throttling and all of that to limit breaking?
Well, you implement everything yourself. So, well, you implement everything. There are tools that help you, and there are custom test cases. So, but you can edit everything in there. So you can add throttling for sure. And also, there's this feature of cooldown that's built in the platform. So for a same asset, let's say you just scanned it, then you don't want to scan it for another 24 hours. Then for this IP, you're not gonna relaunch a scan on it for the next 24 hours. So it's not throttling exactly, but it also helps not like overwhelm this target by scanning it like 20 times a day.
And just a small question also, like once you have the attack surface mapped out, like all the hosts and the websites, whatnot, and the graph, is there a way to get this as like a CSV or a Parquet file or a DB, something like as a quick export?
There's no quick export function right now, but I don't know if you're familiar with Kaido. You could really use that with the API and extract the data right with that.
Nice.
you support integration with any other tools that kind of might be relevant, such as Bloodhound or whatever?
Yeah, it's really more of an external thing right now, so we don't have this concept of Active Directory. Well, yeah, it's still there, but anyway, we don't really have the concept of Active Directory, but we do integrate with known tools like Nuclei for jobs, and we integrate with Masscan for big scan capabilities. So those are the two main big names that we're using right now.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
All right. So I developed a weird passion for a specific problem, which is we're the first generation who are going to die with our passwords and our password managers and our Bitcoin and all of this kind of stuff, because we don't have a way of passing it on to our kids or trusted people without having to give the password to a specific person. So I was kind of developing a company called Superback around this. But then I also had another epiphany. I was like, encryption is good. It's supposed to offer, and I always mess up that word in English, confidentiality. Whew, that was good. Or does it, right? We live in a world now where some nation states force us to decrypt our devices in front of them to go through borders and stuff like this. So plausible deniability is really something that I believe is mission critical for technological sovereignty. Now, there are tools such as VeraCrypt. Who knows VeraCrypt? Okay, a few of you. Which is pretty cool. It allows you to do essentially a file system with a sub-file system that has different credentials, and you can hide stuff in file systems. The problem with this is, in the context of succession planning or essentially paper backups, it doesn't fit in a small form factor that is machine readable on paper. So I essentially invented something called BlockCrypt, and whoa, how does this work? Okay. And what BlockCrypt does essentially is it's an abstraction on top of AES 256 that allows one to have a known set of headers that are essentially referring to a specific key space in the ciphertext of the data. So for instance, header 1, if you know its password, will reveal that its associated data is at position 0 and is 156 bytes long. And then if you know the password for header 2, it tells you where it is, header 3, and an attacker only really knows that header 1 is used. The attacker doesn't know that header 2, 3, or 4 are used. And essentially the headers, if they're not behind a passphrase, they're essentially filled up with random padding, which is like cipher noise or crypto noise. So you don't really theoretically know how to distinguish encrypted data from noise. And then once you know those, and it's the space is pretty small, so it's really easy to try all of those bytes and find how many others are related to a password. Then you can encrypt data and be able to address it really quick. So here, for instance, you know, at byte 0, you have D1, which is data 1, and then you have its IV and its auth tag, and then you have this for all of the different ones, and if you're only using one, everything else is just random padding. So I can elaborate on this. I don't have a lot of time now, but I would really like people to help peer review BlockCrypt. It's essentially under MIT. This is not the whole backup solution for this. This is really just the cryptographic fundamental that I'm trying to make available to everyone for plausible deniability. So yeah, here's a link to the repository. Let me know if you have questions.
So Is this a competitor to VeraCrypt? So it's supposed to encrypt file systems on device?
No. So the problem with VeraCrypt is it doesn't work for archival purposes because it's on flash memory, for instance, and you can have bit rot. So I wanted something that will kind of live more than 100 or 500 years. So the idea of encrypting the data and putting it within the QR code. So this is not like access to some kind of a cloud component. This here has a Bitcoin 24-word mnemonic master password for KeePassXC and a TOTP recovery token for Proton Mail within the encrypted QR code. So it's much easier for people to understand how to safekeep this. And yeah, so it's not like it's an alternative that works in the context of archival like data storage on paper.
So you print the secret, then store it in an actual safe made of metal.
Brute forcing this is $10.5 billion. So this is the safe. You could put it on Times Square with $100 million in Bitcoin, and you'll be fine.
All right, thank you.
So let's say I'm real afraid of quantum computers in 100 years.
Yeah.
Do you have like self-destructing papers just in case?
Yeah.
I lose it or something?
Yeah. So especially in the context of superbacked, I'm very conscious of quantum computing. This uses AES 256, and block crypt itself does not define the key derivation function. You get to use the one you want. In the context of superbacked, we use Argon 2, so it's extremely slow. So technically speaking, it is already quantum resistant. But in the context of superbacked, you can do backups that are 2 of 3 using Shamir secret. So you have 2 layers of cryptography that both are quantum computing, safe. So
fair enough.
Okay, so you have a very, very interesting proof of concept with a QR code, which is useful today. But what are some applications that you would like to see if other people were to pick up this technology and use it tomorrow? And I'll just throw out an idea off the top of my head. Something like a paste bin where you're able to access a plausibly deniable message, for example.
Can you say that last word again?
Like paste bin, where you're able to access a plausibly deniable encrypted message.
Yeah. Okay. So this will not answer specifically the question, but what I find is missing in the space right now, and I haven't found anywhere, and that's why I had to kind of make it. And I want hopefully some of you guys to help me peer review it, because I may have fucked up, to be honest. It's written beta. I know it's cryptographically sound, but I'm not sure about the plausible deniability if it's like NSA level threat, or something like this. So there is no alternatives to VeraCrypt that I'm aware of at all in the context of plausible deniability. And VeraCrypt does not work for paper backups. So why is block crypt important? Cryptography is good. It gives you some kind of a confidential landscape, only if an adversary doesn't force you to decrypt it. So this, to my knowledge, is the world's first system that allows one to have multiple secrets. The goal, and there's a pretty good pull request to make that web compatible. So I think anyone building cryptographic tools nowadays should start including plausible deniability, because that is what gives you true confidentiality, because you can decrypt it but without revealing that there's hidden secrets. So yes, it could be used for what you're saying. It could be used for anything. And since it works, this is essentially like encrypted ciphertext in a JSON format. You can do anything with it.
So the take home is, yes, other practical applications, but let's verify it and make sure we're not going to be victim to French diplomacy or whatever.
Yeah, I'd like as many people as possible to help me peer review it. It's under 200 lines of code. It's extremely simple. So if there's anyone here who knows cryptographers that are way smarter than I am, I'd love them to have a look at this.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. So the topic today is about one of the aspects people talk a lot in terms of business, which is AI and particularly RAG for real-time domain-based security. So I'm going to talk a bit more about the concerns that someone might have trying to secure large-scale versions of it. So this is usually the three types of RAGs that you have. Most people that are just starting in AI are doing kind of a naive RAG. Usually that's just the model and public information enhancements. So if you have like trade information that are completely public, you tend to do the naive RAG. And then once you start doing a bit more advanced stuff where you want some information per person, you tend to go for the advanced RAG. And when you want to share information in between users, you have basically no choice to go for modular RAG implementations. Most companies in the world are actually in the advanced RAG. Very few are already starting to do modular RAG. They're mostly doing a more advanced modeling and not focusing on the applicative enhancements that you have to do on top of the RAG. So the core reason why I printed this slide is the security is not done the same whether in which category you're currently building. So just to give an example of how complex it can get for the advanced RAG, for the advanced implementation of Google for their search subsystem, is you have a lot of elements for the data ingestion part, and then you have the vector databases for which they use AlloyDB, and then you have an evaluation and basically often a re-ranking system that applies on the other serving part. But the objective is to reduce significantly hallucinations by using this method. Instead of trying to build and add everything to the base model, you delegate the information that is real-time and domain-dependent to the enhancement that are in the vector database in order to have more accurate information. So the objective is to really show here that using normal methods of security to try to secure the queries between the normal, between the database and the model, you have to perform some level of security checks. And usually those get extremely complex to impossible if you want to evaluate the content of a query. So for example, in the first case, you ask the model, give me the account information of a person mentioned previously, and you have to evaluate that statically. You can't because it's in the model context, and the model context is not available in the request, but in the context that is in a cache of a system. So if you want to evaluate who is this information is being accessed for, you can't really because it's not in the query itself. And you have queries that are on other languages, so that's really fun because a lot of the models support 34, 38 languages. So have fun trying to evaluate that statically with regexes. And then finally, the model has key capabilities. So it can do encryption on the fly within the query. So here, a simple XOR decryption with a payload and a key as universe, and find the answer to that, decrypt it, and then find the answer to the query, the underlying query, and the query here, post XOR gives what is the meaning of life, and you have to try to get to the authorization linked to that query. So the point is, if you're trying to do RAG and advanced ML, don't try to analyze the query statically. You have to evaluate it with a model as well. Ideally, the same model as being used applicatively in order to determine what is supposed to be accessed by that system. And just to finalize, the aspects that get way more complicated in terms of security is not as much the front layers. So the more you get advanced between naive, advanced, and modular, the more the front changes in that scenario. The aspect that gets more complicated in terms of security is between indexing and retrieval. So that's where you would put interceptors that in the naive and advanced, you would just check relative to the user authentication and the tagging that is done in terms of vector elements, basically that it belongs to the end user. But once you start to get to modular, the check between the embed, the model, and the retrieval gets way more complex. And that part is being in development in most advanced groups. because that's how you also basically resolve what needs to be done before retrieving information from another subsystem. But it's the objective of this talk is really get people a bit more aware of the complexities that get done with the advanced RAG, and try not to do it statically. Those are meant to be evaluated differently, so you have to get on in terms of security with VML for VMLs, and that's kind of the objective, is don't try to do that statically, you won't get to an answer.
One question here is like, what is the threat model? It's like what the security here you're talking about is trying to prevent exactly.
So for the normal one is to obtain information belonging to another person by forcing the model to reveal information about someone else. So that's for in the case where you want to store less information, because rapidly, if you deduplicate all the information per user in your database, it ends up being gigantic amounts. So you want to be able to reuse some of the information between users. So the modular use case, you have to think basically about more granular authorization, because information is shared between users.
Okay, thank you.
So is it targeting prompt injection? I know in the OS top 10 for ML, there's a couple of injection attacks, and like there's direct injections and indirect injections. So
no, I'm not trying to secure the model. I'm trying to secure the information that is added to the models, and the underlying model can change and be whatever you want. You can use OpenAI, you can use any of the open models, you can use ChatGPT. The underlying model doesn't matter. What matters is are the embeddings and the RAG, and specifically the RAG, the security of the RAG aspect, because nobody talks about it, and people need to know that you shouldn't try to do that statically. It won't work.
Thanks.
Okay, so some of those architecture diagrams are intimidating. There's a lot of information, and where could we go to learn more about this problem? Like, is there a resource available to us to help us secure RAG today with best practices?
No.
Oh, no.
One of the objectives of the talk is to get people to be aware that those systems are usually extremely expensive, and companies don't divulge as much how they're securing their large language models. Even Google, for example, one of the core things that I didn't talk about, if you want to make sure to isolate between an advanced and a modular, try to do, for example, 2 to the power of 0.84. If it gives you an exact result, it's a modular implementation using offloading to a computing engine. If it gives you an approximation, it's probably an advanced RAG. So the latest 2 versions, I think, ChatGPT 4, E, B, or F, and the latest model by Google are in the advanced category. They're not modular, but the Edge model in Microsoft Copilot does compute offload to Wolfram Alpha. So it will give you an exact result.
It's very insightful. Thank you.
And we have our final lightning talk. So Sagar will talk to us about preserving the integrity of something that is not on the screen anymore. So yeah, so please welcome Sagar.
Hi. Yeah, so this is Sagar. I'm traveling all the way from India to talk about deepfakes, more or less in the era of generative AI, the line that is getting blurred between the synthetic data and the real data. And deepfakes is kind of a double-edged sword, which kind of helps artists and designers to fasten their work. But at the end, it also helps the threat actors to generate synthetic media, that is basically used to impersonate someone else. Imagine you getting a WhatsApp video of yourself claiming something that you are not. So that is what deepfakes are all about. These are some of the new snippets which talks about laws of generative AI content, synthetic AI contents, or the deepfake data. These are some of the use cases from India. Probably one of them are the famous use cases of a CFO joining a Zoom call and approving a transaction of uh, of 200 crores. I don't know how much conversion with that will happen into. But yeah, so this talks about all the threats and the finance workers, how much $1 million they have fished out of the bank accounts using deepfake. Let it be any synthetic data from audio, video, images to large language models causing phishing attacks. So the major purpose of this attack made an FBI statement release out to talk about what synthetic media looks like and what sort of privacy and security operations that you need to do to control all this form of synthetic medias that are getting generated. These are some of the use cases that are getting exploited using synthetic media. Let it be an immigration check or setting up a new bank account where you have to do an eKYC system to verify that the um, uh, the video or the selfie of the person taking is real or not, and then it happens at the account activation. Similarly, age verification in games for certain games, you need to have certain amount of age, right? So that's where all these use cases are getting exploited when we talk about deepfakes or synthetic medias in the era of generative AI. This is a pretty basic attack. I think I mean we did a lot of sophisticated attacks in the liveness SDK examples uh, uh, where the liveness SDK transfers the images from the device to the cloud servers and it's not encrypted, or they do it or they do the authentication purely local on the client side. So any rooted device doing local authentication can easily be bypassed to this. So in this example, he's just trying to log into a web page using a photo in front of a webcam, and it's detecting that hey, this is a person, and it's enabling him the access, just like how you log into your mobile phone or to the laptop showing a photo of any person. So it's as basic as that. But there are some attacks which are more sophisticated and it bypasses the login system like this ones. So we did we built a platform. So my friend will actually try to set up a new bank account where he'll upload the ID card and the front and the back of his ID card, and he'll basically try out to say that hey. My OTP is this of a randomly generated phone number, which will verify if it's a person is real or not. But the real deal comes in a deepfake detection where he'll upload his video and the AI model based on his skin texture, his mouth gestures, and in his eye blinks and certain amount of other characteristics, it will predict that hey, this is a deepfake video or a real video. So obviously this one is a real video, but what we did on top of that, we had a face swapped video of Mr. Bean. Obviously, this is not a Mr. Bean video. This was a deepfake. We tried to run a same model. We tried to run the same video on the same model, and it predicted that hey, this is a deepfake or a fake video. So this is how we build a platform or we build a solution based on the skin textures. So there are a couple of ways to detect if it's a video, if the data, or if we talk about the video, if it's a deepfake video or an authentic video. With that, lightning fast, Amit.
So I guess you just started a cat and mouse game. So how long do you expect it will take for someone to come up with a mean to create a deep fake that will beat your system?
That's a good question. I think it will take about a year from, I mean, in the market, if you see all the solutions, even if who are detecting deepfake, on paper, they are claiming few things, but on paper there is nothing, eventual solid. Because generative AI is evolving, and as generative AI is evolving, the security side will evolve a little later than, the generative AI capabilities. So this will take a bit of time so that we have a complete firewall for fake videos.
Yeah, thank you.
So for your detection of deepfakes, are you basically following like the latest papers, or what's your approach? Is it your own approach, or did you take like some approach that was published, or?
Okay, so I've used couple of research papers. But used my own machine learning model or my own logic to detect if it's a video is a fake or a real one. Like I said, there can be couple of ways. There are two ways to detect if a video is fake or real. The first way is static, in the sense that you take an image based on the skin texture, see that if it's a fake video or a real video. And on the dynamic side, if you have a video recording of someone, let's say someone well-known who is publicly available on the YouTube channel, right? How many times they blink an eye, how many times, if they are in stage, how many times they are staggering. Based on that characteristic, you can figure out that if it's a face swapped of someone else, or if he is himself presenting, himself in the video. So there are a couple of ways to do that.
Thanks.
So have you used this on publicly presented deepfakes? Like, for example, did you find content on Twitter or elsewhere knowing that it was a deepfake and then evaluated it? Or I'm finished. That's my question.
Yeah. So there was a TikTok profile of I guess Tom Cruise, who got 1 million views on 2 days, but it was a deepfaked account entirely. So people are using it to monetize it or create impersonation, to be someone else who they are not.
Okay, follow-up question. So you mentioned that the model is able to identify whether it is fake or not based on qualities such as skin texture and eye blinks and other kind of like biometric signals. So does that mean that in order for me to use this system, I would have to interact with it for a certain amount of time first? Or what does like the onboarding look like for me to go and actually use this today on myself?
So there are two phases to it. First one is celebrities whom videos are already available. I can create a model. The next step is for, let's say, if you want to bulletproof yourself against deepfake, you need to give me a 5-minute video of yourself. Then I can feed it to my machine learning model, and then you will have a deepfake bulletproof for yourself.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Yep.
All right, and with that, we are done with NorthSec 2024 for the conference part of the event. The CTF is starting tonight. Are you excited, or? Yeah, so thanks everyone. Thanks to the moderators. Thanks Marc-André, François, and Octavia. And yeah, we'll see you next year.